Hey, this is Marcus Guevara. Welcome to the Thirsting for Truth podcast. I am your host, Marcus Guevara, with my co-host, Alicia Franco. Alicia.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us.
So this is our official second show, and we are still here. we didn't go anywhere after the first show. Today there was a solar eclipse. I don't know if you had a chance to catch that. I was at work, and Diane called me and told me that there was you gotta go to this website. There's they're doing live broadcasts of the solar eclipse, and so I went to this website and was like streaming it, and I just thought it was so hilarious. I was cracking up because it is a big deal. Like it is a big thing, but I thought it was so funny because the way they were announcing it, or covering it, was like it was a live, sports competition. Like,
That's what I was thinking
gosh,
too.
Look at it right now. Like the light is coming out from the sides. It's so amazing. I can't believe it. And I was watching. It is super impressive, but it's also kind of hilarious because it was like, it's just it just looks.
Our reactions are funny. It's kind of like when you tell a joke, and the joke is it's a good joke, but when somebody kind of laughs a little too hard at it, then that just makes everybody start laughing. That's what I was thinking about. It's funny you said that. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Then people invited it, like somebody at work. They had the glasses, and they were like, "Hey, you want to come over and check it out?" I was like, okay, I guess, I'll come check it out. And so I walked over, and they gave me the glasses, which at first I thought were kind of weird because I don't know, I guess I've never put them on before. And I put them on, but they look like they're just like a thick black cardboard, I was like, something wrong here? You literally can't see anything until you look up at the sun and you see that I saw this tiny little, it was like smaller than my pinky, like the top of my pinky, a little sliver of light was, and I was just like, that's nice, it's really nice.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna go back to work now.
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that it's not like a really cool thing. It's just, I don't know. It wasn't that big a deal for me, at least.
That's funny.
Yeah. So let's jump right into it. As I understand it, you've had some stuff going on in Texas recently. Now that I'm not inside Texas, I have not been really seeing this and following it. But apparently, Texas is now it looks like they're just wrapping up the end of a debate or a fight on a new bathroom bill. What can you tell us about what's going on? Because I really don't know, to be honest with you.
So this is kind of funny. When Marcus and I were talking about what we wanted our topic to be today, I said, hey, why don't we talk about the bathroom bills? There's a big debate going on with that right now. And he said, really? Because it's a big deal down here in Texas. I've been listening to Texas Public Radio, watching the local stations follow it. And so from my perspective, for anybody who is listening that is not from Texas, Governor Greg Abbott has been under fire for basically saying that he wants to support. Now, Governor Abbott is a Republican, so he tends to be a little more right-sided. And I guess the debate was...
and by right, you mean like conservative, like right political?
Conservative, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for correcting me there. Yeah.
Correct or right?
Yeah. So there was a bill proposed to limit bathroom access for any people who identified as transgender. So just to clarify, what we're talking about here is any people who do not identify with the sex on their birth certificate. So, if they're male and they identify as female, or they're female and they identify as male, and there are, a plethora of different things that people can identify with these days, right? But just to clarify, what the bill was saying was that you must use the restroom with the gender corresponding to the gender on your birth certificate. Your biological sex is what the bill actually reads. And so of course there's a debate on that. There's definitely some protests going on. People have some strong opinions about this topic, and so as Catholics, this is something that we need to be talking about, and it's definitely something that we're talking about down here in Texas. And again, it's funny, I didn't realize that it wasn't
there's a lot
widely
going on
discussed up there.
I'm sure it's around, like, I'm sure if I had been kind of like scouring through news, I would have seen it. It's just there's a lot going on with everything that was going on in Charlottesville, the debate about taking down statues that are of Confederate leaders and that sort of thing. That's just kind of been the thing that's been mostly on my news feed. And so yeah, I hadn't really seen. I mean, I've seen other states who've had the same battle. I hadn't seen what was going on in Texas. So what's your take on it? How do you feel about it? I mean, being that you're in Texas and this is something that directly affects you.
Right. I can say that I personally don't know anybody that has struggled with transgenderism. I personally do know people that have struggled with same-sex attraction. But the issue at hand here is, for example, let's say, Alicia, I am a woman, right? But let's say that I wanted to identify as a male, as the gender that God did not give me. And so I want to use the male restroom. I dress like a man, I act like a man, and for all intents and purposes, I believe that I'm a man. Why can I not use the men's restroom? So as this is the argument that I understand the transgender side to be applying. And so as people who do not identify as transgender, but particularly those who tend to be more conservative, like Governor Greg Abbott, the argument is on the other side that, well, how do we regulate this? What about the people who are not transgender? They're just, using the restroom that they've used their whole lives. They haven't changed on that. And let's say that somebody who may not necessarily be transgender, but quote unquote says they want to identify as transgender. So that means that a male can go into the women's restroom and use that restroom if he so chooses. And so that's the danger that is at hand. And I'm really interested, Marcus, to hear your thoughts on this as someone who's married and has children, sons and daughters. Parents have expressed particular concern about this because parents seem to be the voices for students. If their son or daughter is identifying as transgender, they want their son or daughter to have those rights to use the restroom of their choice. And how would you feel, Marcus, having children being in situations where they may have to use a restroom with somebody who identifies as transgender? What are your thoughts on that?
I've been thinking about this topic a lot lately, and I'll tell you why in a second, actually. Obviously, it's a big deal right now in society. There's a lot of people talking about it, and there's a lot of confusion. And I guess ultimately, the way I'm looking at this is that there's a lot of people who are very interested in being, progressive in our current society. Like they want to right societal wrongs and injustices. They have this I guess this bleeding heart, this desire for seeing people treated with dignity and integrity. And so you'll hear me say this kind of, very often, probably just about every time. In any situation, the first thing I want to try to do is I want to look for the good, because I always believe very firmly that people are looking for something good, that they have a desire for good, and the problem usually becomes the way that they go about getting that good. We talked last time about hunger and how that's very, sort of like it's a great indicator of the sort of spiritual hungers that we have. And, just like we see in society with people going after, curing their hunger in the wrong way, we see that happen in a lot of times in moral senses, right? So the whole transgender topic to me is it's actually kind of fascinating, because it's a moral issue that you can't really, fight with logic, right? You're looking at a discussion that really is not aiming to supplant logic with other logic. It's really trying to throw logic out the window. So when we talk about transgender people and how they should be treated, the first question is, what does it mean to be transgender, really? It's a very kind of fluid definition. It almost means kind of whatever you want it to mean, because on the one hand you have a case of like a person who's biologically female, who at some point in their lives, and maybe some would say that it's since they can remember or whatever, but in the case of like at some point in their lives they feel like they either identify as a man or they want to be a man, and so at that point they begin to identify as a man and no longer as a female, even if they've done no changes to their physique. Their biology remains the same, and your biology will remain the same, but the actual like makeup of their appearance might differ because of surgery or what have you, right? And yeah, they can inject themselves with hormones and start to kind of manipulate their biology. And that's one case, though. There are other cases where somebody might decide that they identify as the opposite sex, and they don't do anything about it. They don't get any kind of surgery. They don't do hormone treatment. They just begin to identify as the opposite sex, even though they look and talk exactly the same, and they might even act exactly the same or whatever, right? And both of those cases, we would say that they're both transgender. We would also say that there are other people who they could identify as non-binary, and these other, like I used to be a male and now I'm not binary. I mean, I'm not male or female, which again is flooring, because we're no longer talking about logic. We're really talking about emotions, how I feel. And it's very taboo in our current culture to say that, your feelings, that might be what you feel, but you're incorrect. You're wrong. Logically, you're wrong. You know what I mean? I could feel like 1 + 1 = 3, but logically that's an incorrect statement. And if you to try and push that as a logical truth is incorrect. You're wrong. I am a person who, in leadership, I have to be able to tell people that they're wrong sometimes if I believe they're wrong. Now, now we're getting into a whole debate about, what exactly is right and wrong and who defines that. But regardless, again, the first thing we do is, at least in my opinion, the first thing I try to do always is look for the good. And the good, I think, in this entire situation, from the side of people who, feel what they call gender dysphoria, this identifying either as the opposite sex or changing the way that you identify. I think that tells us something good. And so this internal struggle that we have with our sexuality, with our identifying, with our sexuality, because, and if you look at it, the controversy is like, it's not that people are identifying as a basketball player and, like that's how they find their identity. They're using a sexual matter, right? They're using gender, and even more so, like it becomes an issue of their sexuality. It's not just maleness or femaleness, but it has a lot to do with sexuality, and I think that says a lot, right? It says a lot about what's going on in our culture and in our world. That John Paul II, his whole theology of body, and we've talked about this stuff in the past, and just how, when we don't have a good handle of what sex means and its proper place in our lives, then we start a very desperate search to figure out the answer to that question. What is sex for? What is the meaning? Why was I given this body? You know, what does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? Is there a deeper meaning to this? And that search often will sometimes lead us to very, you know, weird, dark alleys. You know, again, if you look back to the analogy of hunger, imagine that you're homeless, you have no food, and you have no money to buy food. Let's just say that, you know, being on the side of the road and asking for money is just, for whatever reason, is just not an option. And you're starving. You're starving. You're so hungry. You feel like you are literally dying of starvation. And so you, in a desperate search to find food somewhere, you start to look, and you know, you can't just walk. I mean, you don't want to go and walk in and steal food from you know, a restaurant or something, right? Like, you're not looking to cause havoc and whatnot. And so where do you go? Well, again, this is where I feel like if you're starving that much and you don't know how to get a hold of food, but you know, like, instinctively, I need food to live. I need food. You start kind of wandering around, and you find yourself in these dark alleys where there are dumpsters, and there's, you know, food that's thrown out. And again, you're like, well, I got a choice here. It's either, you know, to me, it's life or death. Do I eat out of the dumpster? And, you know, maybe I risk getting sick or whatever, but I'm going to die if I don't eat. And so this is where I think a lot of people find themselves. Now, that might be insulting to some people. I get that. Like, I'm not trying to be insulting here. What I'm saying is that this is something that I can relate to because I found myself in the same spot many years ago when I was, again, just desperately searching for the answers to that ache I had inside me, that ache that I didn't know what sex was for. I knew, though, I desired it. And I searched and I did a lot of really crazy experimental things trying to find that satisfaction, you know, like the thing that was going to make me happy, that was going to stop that ache and that yearning, you know, for intimacy. And it never truly satisfied. As soon as I had a taste, you know, just like if you eat out of the dumpster when you're starving, there was an initial satisfaction there, right? I like, okay, it's good. Like, oh gosh, you know, I have some relief from that pain of, you know, the suffering of that desire. But ultimately, I always felt sick. I always felt like, that wasn't it. So then I had to go find something new. And I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Like, this is how I see, you know, the world is kind of, you know, finding all of these new ways to, you know, search out, like, okay, so, in the 60s and 70s, you know, the sexual revolution and Playboy, that was the answer to our problems right there, right? That was going to do it for us. It didn't do it. It didn't do it. Having sex with whoever you wanted, whenever you wanted, didn't do it. Now all we have is, you know, just more pain, more divorce, more broken families, and people without parents. Okay, so now it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to get married. I'm just going to date whoever I want and whatever. Like, that's not done it for us. Okay, well, let's search, you know, in same-sex marriage. And like, if only we could get validated by getting the same rights as heterosexual people, then we'll be happy. Like, okay, that's not doing it. Okay, well, maybe I'll try, you know, being the other gender. Maybe my unhappiness is because I'm not really meant to be a woman, or I'm not really meant to be a man. And now, if only I could get the rights to, you know, be solidified, justified that I am, you know, the other gender that I was, you know, not born as, then and only then I will be happy. And I feel like that's where we are right now, is we're still searching, and we still haven't found that, you know, that answer to that question, that ache. What is sex for?
I want to ask a question.
Hey, you got robotic again. I don't know why that happens, but unplug your mic and plug it back in and see if that fixes it. So if you heard our first episode, you heard Alicia in a robotic voice. She tends to do that. She does exist. I promise you. She's actually a human being. She's not a robot that I programmed to agree with me and make me look good or sound good on radio. And Alicia, for your kind of just to make sure that you're on the right track there. If you unplug it, plug it back in, make sure on your Hangouts you're choosing your mic. So, are you back on? Nope, not back on just yet. So, all right. Anyway, well, I'll kind of just continue on the last note that I was talking about in that search or that ache. Recently, and this is why I've been thinking a lot about this issue. And as soon as you come on, just say, "Hey, I'm back." That way, I know that you're back, and I can ask for your input whenever you get a chance. But the reason that I've been thinking about this a lot lately is because, sort of coincidentally, recently, John Paul, who's our oldest son, he's 5 years old, has been having this, urge to wear Elizabeth's clothes. Elizabeth is his sister. She's 6 years old, and he's been wanting to wear her clothes, and so he's been like, he went and just like by himself just put on a dress, and came down, or put on her pajamas and came down. And the first day, my wife called me and was like, "Hey, he put on her dress and he came down and was like, what do you think I should do here?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, it's not that big a deal. He's 5 years old. It's just there's a curiosity there, and not that big a deal, right?" Then the second day, he's like, he wants to wear the dresses and stuff like that again. And the day that the first day he wore a dress, I came home and I was like, "Hey, what's up, buddy? You want to wear Elizabeth's dress?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "Oh, because I could do this." Like, he's like spinning, like she's been doing the twirling lately and all that stuff. And he's like, "Because I could do this." And then we also have our air conditioning vents are on the floor, not on the ceiling. And so she goes and she puts her dress there, and it fluffs up like a little umbrella. And he was like, "Look, and I can do this." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, all right, no big deal." The second day, he did it again, and so on the third day, again, like the second day, I was like, whatever. We kind of just acted like it wasn't that big a deal, because it wasn't really a big deal to me, because he's 5 years old. He's just curious, he's trying things out, trying to, he's like, "Oh, like I've just realized that we wear different kinds of clothes," and like, man, she could do all this cool stuff with her clothes, and mine's good for just wearing. Anyway, so on the third day when I came home, I sat him down and was like, "Hey, let's have a talk." And this is also, I was giving myself time to think through, how do I respond to this? And I will be honest, like, part of it was I had a little bit of a nervousness, and I was like, man, I hadn't thought about this before. I don't know why. I haven't thought about this. What do I do in this situation, And like, there was a little bit of a fear of all, like, in my mind, I was thinking of all the things that could potentially come out of this, like, I've been seeing all this stuff in the news. I've been reading about, transgenderism and gender dysphoria and stuff. And I wanted to make sure that I really thought and prayed about my response and tried to figure out, like, how do I make sure that, I'm doing the right thing in this situation. And so then I finally sat him down so we could have a conversation, and I said, "Hey, buddy." I sat down with John Paul and Elizabeth, and Anna Marie kind of she can't really sit and just listen yet. She's just kind of a little too crazy at 3 years old. But anyway, she was there with us. I sat him down and I said, "Hey, John Paul, you've been wearing Elizabeth's clothes lately, huh?" And he was like, "Yep." And I'm like, "Okay, well, like, why are you wearing Elizabeth's clothes? Why do you want to wear her dresses?" And he goes, he's like, "Because I love Ellie." And I'm like, "All right, that's cool. It's very sweet." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what else? Why else do you want to wear her dresses?" He's like, "I don't know. It's cool. Like, I like dresses, and I like her clothes." And I was like, "That's really sweet. You want to be like Elizabeth, huh?" And he goes, "Yep." And so I'm like, "Elizabeth, don't you think that's really cute? He wants to be like you?" And she's like, "Yeah, obviously." She's like, "Sounds good." So then I'm like, "Okay, John Paul." Both of them, I kind of give them an opportunity to answer. I'm like, "What makes a boy?" And he's like, actually, you know what he said? I forgot. I asked him that question because I asked him, "Well, why else do you want to wear her clothes?" And he goes, "Because I want to be a girl." And so I'm like, "Okay, well, what makes a girl?" And he's like, wear dresses and do makeup and paint your nails and really all this like cool stuff. You know, boys don't do any cool stuff really with like, you know, the stuff that they wear or put on themselves. And so I'm like, okay. And I asked Elizabeth, I'm like, Elizabeth, what makes a girl? And she's like, you do dancing and twirl and you know, same thing, lipstick and all this other stuff, right? Like, all right, sounds good. So what makes a boy? And then John Paul's like, strong and, you know, video games and stuff like that. And I'm like, all right. And same thing with Elizabeth and very similar stuff. And I'm like, okay, so if you want, or I said, well, let me ask you this then. What makes a dog? And they're like, they started cracking up like, ah, I'm like, okay, well, they're like, well, they poop. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, well, that's true. And so I'm like, well, does a dog walk? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And does a dog breathe? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, you know, does a dog bark? Okay. So, and then I'm like, well, can you do things like a dog? You know, and they're like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, all right. So, and my thinking here is they can be like each other, and I totally fully support that. I want them to strive to be like each other, right? In my marriage, Diane and I strive very much to be more like each other. There are things that she's good at that I'm not good at. There are things that I'm good at that she's not. She's my wife, so I got to be careful. She's maybe not. She's less than amazing, slightly amazing at. You know, she has her strengths and weaknesses. I really wish I can see you on the video like laughing and cracking up, and nobody can hear you laughing. I really wish that. Nope, I still can't hear you. I can just see your, you know, cracking up, and I just only wish that everybody else could experience the same thing. So anyway, I fully support. I want them to be able to be like each other. But like I asked them, okay, you know, you can do things like a dog, but are you a dog? And they're like, no. Okay. To John Paul, you know, I wanted him to understand this. You know, you are not a girl. You are a boy. Now, you can do things like a girl. And to Elizabeth, same thing. You can do things like a boy. I recognize that people may not like that, you know, what I just said. I recognize that. But it's the truth. Now, here's the other side of the truth that I think that people are not, you know, on the one side, I get it, you know, like we want to, there's people that want to push this whole idea of transgenderism. And then on the other side, people think that that's dangerous and it's wrong. And that's true. But I also think that we have to try to recognize some of the good there and try to help, you know, to push it in that direction, which is that there is a truth that men do need to be more like women, and women sometimes do need to be more like men. You might be able to, if you can ever recover from your microphone issue there, you might be able to speak a little more to the woman's side of it. But at least for a man, yeah, I can very easily say that there are many things that men, as you know, holistically as a whole, need to work on that women and I can hear you now. I can hear you now. So there are things that men can work on that they need to work on to be more like women. You know, that we've always kind of talked about how men just aren't naturally as emotional, and they don't talk about feelings and stuff like that. Women are great at that. Well, guess what? Men need to take on some of those characteristics and be better at it, right? Now that doesn't mean that men need to be women, but we do need to be like them. So again, I wanted to make sure that when I approached my kids and talked about this to my kids, that I was approaching it and with a very careful response, because I don't want them to be embarrassed about this natural desire and curiosity about the opposite sex, right? I want to foster that while also making sure that I'm, helping them to navigate, moral waters to making the right choice. But when John Paul, who's a little boy, sees his big sister, and everybody knows that like older siblings are like God, to younger siblings. They are the definition of what is cool and amazing. And when John Paul looks at his sister and he sees her doing things and he's like, wow, that's so cool. I want to be like her. He admires her. He wants to be like her. So he tries to do the things that she does. He tries to emulate her. And part of that is to like look like her and dress like her. I'm sure that when he sees her twirl in a dress and her dress like just swirls around and does this really cool thing, he looks at that and is like, that's super cool, right? So innocent. I mean, such an innocent thing for a little boy to think. And I don't want to demonize that, right? Which on the one hand, like I think that has happened a lot. And that is also, part of the problem. I think that, the side that's pushing transgenderism has maybe been wounded by. But the opposite end is, the other extreme is like, okay, I'm not going to just say like, oh, wow, look it. He might be wanting to become a girl. And you know what? We should go and maybe take him and get an operation on him so that he can be more like a girl. No, that's like, to me, it's insanity. It's not one extreme or the other extreme. It's really, looking at him and saying, okay, John Paul, what is it exactly that you're looking for? And if what you're looking for is, I want to be more like my sister, I want to have, some of those cool qualities that she has, I have no problem with that. In fact, I want that. I want him to try to be more like his sister, because there are times that I ask her to be more like him, where I say, when she gets, a little scared and she starts crying because she gets in trouble or whatever, and I'll tell her, hey, no, you need to be tough. You need to be like, look at John Paul. When I tell him something and I'm getting mad at him, he looks at me and he is shaking his head and he, he takes it. He doesn't just start crumbling and crying right there. Like, I want her to be stronger and be able to, stand up to that. And do you see what I'm saying? Like, all I'm saying is like, if we look at it from the standpoint of little kids, like, they teach us the best lessons. They can see things from a standpoint of innocence. They're not looking at it from a sexual standpoint. They're not looking at it as what I can do with my body to get sexual pleasure, and how I identify. They're simply looking at it from the standpoint of, very simplistic, I see something that's very cool that I want to try out. I'm curious about it. I wonder what it would be like if I put on a dress, So anyway, now that you're back and I've been, totally dominating this show, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, first I want to applaud you. Do I still sound like a robot, or am I
No,
actually good?
Yeah, you're
okay.
You're a human being
awesome.
Again.
Okay, I don't know why that keeps happening, but anyway, I want to applaud you. That was a really awesome way to break that down for a 5 and at least 6, right? 5 and a 6-year-old.
Yep. That's right.
I thought of something as we were both talking. There may be some things that we have not thought about as two people who are not transgender ourselves, or cisgender, as they say. To anyone who may be listening that struggles with that they may be thinking, oh, well, you didn't address A, you didn't address B, C, D, whatever. How can they, I guess, ask us questions if they want to? Because I know before you had said maybe a possibility to take questions on the show. So what would you tell our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the easiest way is if you go to, if you send us an email to questions@thirstingfortruth.com, or if you go to our Facebook page, you can, post questions there, or in a message, like a private message, if, you don't want to post it publicly. but good point. Like, yeah, this is initially I was just trying to sort of talk about kind of at a high level the initial thoughts that I have, and I guess if it's not clear enough, I'll say this very briefly. I get that there is some good there. Like, I don't want people to come away from this thinking that we just think that everybody who's struggles with this issue of transgenderism, with maybe themselves going through it, or somebody that they love, or just sort of in general being a part of the movement or whatever, that they're totally evil people and we don't want to have anything to do with them. First, I do look at things from a standpoint of truth, and making sure that like we're considering truth objectively. Now, that I don't mean to say that as a judgment on people, because that we can talk about that maybe another time. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about this today, but like when I talk about a particular subject, a philosophical type of subject, I'm talking about the object of the discussion, which is never a person, right? So I don't know any particular people who struggle with this, but even if I did, I still wouldn't have enough information to make a moral judgment on them. That's why we say we leave that to God. It's not for us to do, but we can judge again, like an objective thing, like can a man ever change to be a woman? And that's kind of what we're talking about. But I do want to emphasize that I do understand that there is some good there, that there's something that you're searching for. And what we're saying is that what the church offers is not, to just simply accept transgenderism as the ideology as truth, but to say that what you're really searching for, there is an answer for, and so I'll pass it to you. But here's kind of the way that I have been looking at this recently. In Catholic apologetics, we've for a long time talked about just looking at a logical level and just having a conversation with people that doesn't involve God, but is just like I can talk about abortion and not even talk about God or religion or anything like that, and I can show why abortion is wrong or immoral, right? I feel like we're getting to a point where that no longer is a fruitful thing. Like I feel like in the whole idea of this transgender movement is not really about logic, but it's getting to a point where like our very own identity is being challenged, and I feel that we're now at the point where we have to start talking about God and bringing God into the equation, right? Because it's not it's not just an issue of reason, but it's getting so far into the point of who am I and why am I, that question cannot be answered without going into the subject of there being a creator who created you with a purpose. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a perfect plug opportunity for us to talk about the theology of the body, because we've mentioned it a little bit already. And I think we should kind of tell our listeners, who maybe some have heard of it, maybe some have not, maybe some have studied the theology of the body. And so, if I may, for those who have never heard of the theology of the body before, it is the title given to a series of talks given by Pope John Paul II many, many years ago. And these talks were all compiled, they were written down, and they were put into, it looks like a book, but it's really not a book. But his talks are all compiled, put together, and basically encompass the catechesis or teaching of what our bodies are. What is the church's teaching on, not only what our bodies are, because it's easy to assume that this is just a sexual topic, but it's like you said earlier, I'm a woman. Why am I a woman? What does that mean? I'm a man. Why am I a man? What does that mean? Why are there only two genders? It all kind of comes to light with the theology of the body. And so that is the very basis of how Thirsting for Truth even started. So I think that if we all knew, this would be a perfect world, right? If we all knew what the theology of the body was and we accepted it, our world would be very different. But that's not the reality. So if you haven't dove into the theology of the body before, look it up. I'm going to say it a couple more times. Theology of the body, theology of the body. Try saying that a couple times really, really fast. It's really, really great. It changed my life, changed Marcus's life, changed Diane's life. Anybody who has read it and accepts it has been impacted by it. And if any of these issues that we've already talked about are something that you guys are struggling with, it's definitely something that you should look into.
Absolutely. And I think, again, I've always strove to really, and I don't know, I feel like I don't know if this is going to make sense here, because a lot of this stuff is just recent thoughts that I've been having, about my own faith and how I can help people in my capacity of this ministry. And again, I've always sort of been able to speak to people on a level of reason, and then only get to that point where we're talking about church and God, when it sort of comes there. But I feel like, again, I feel like this is in one way, I think it's a very dangerous battle. It's a very dangerous battle that if we lose it, the consequences are very grave. And by that, I mean, what we're talking about here is the question of, can we actually define a thing based on now just science, right? So now, because it almost feel like the narrative of the debate has changed, from, well, if I don't believe in God, then I'm not going to believe it. I'm only going to believe what science says. And now that, the Christian apologetics has become, more on par with the level of being able to, talk science and faith and demonstrate why, faith is actually reasonable from a scientific point of view. Now it's like the narrative has changed to, well, I'm not going to accept science either. I'm just going to, this is how I feel. It's very difficult to, to talk to people on that level, because, like, well, you don't accept, any kind of standard of morality from religion, faith. You don't now accept standards that are sort of like widely regarded as scientific facts. Now it's just, sort of an emotionally charged thing, like purely emotional, and it's like we've sort of accepted that, right? Like, a large part of the culture, or it seems like, at least through the media, that a large part of the culture is on board with this. That's super dangerous. I mean, the implications of that are again, potentially insane. If you, how do we, and I know that the people look at this as an extremist point of view, but seriously, like, how do you nail this down so that it doesn't go so far out of control that people are now, identifying as animals, and this is kind of a joke, but I mean, in a certain sense, I don't see how you can define somebody who says, stays home from work, but identifies as somebody who's actually at work right now. Like, yeah, I didn't actually get my work done today. Like, that's what your perspective is, but I actually identify as a guy who is super productive today, right? And you can't tell me that I wasn't productive. Like, that's a manager's nightmare, that I can't tell you something I observe, and because your perception of it is different, and now I have to respect how you feel about a thing instead of what a thing actually is, right? Like, I can't. This is how I see it, at least for me. And again, I don't know if that sounds dumb to you.
I'm thinking of a disorder that I was reading about that really kind of shed some light on this for me, because as Christians, it's really important for us to always ask the question. I like where you're coming from, Marcus, when you say, well, where's the good? I like to ask, what how can I love this person, because first and foremost this is a person and they're struggling with something. And this really came to light to me when I was reading about a disorder called BIID, body identity integrity disorder. I don't know if I mixed that up, entity identity disorder, something of that sort, where it can be really any part of the body, but it's a real disorder in which, I'll use an example, the leg. Somebody says, they'll look at their left leg and say, my right leg is fine, but this left leg, it's not my leg. I don't want it, and I want to cut it off. And it's a real disorder where these people will contact physicians and say, I want you to cut my leg off. It's not mine. And of course, the physicians say, sorry, I'm not going to cut your leg off. There's no medical need to do that. We don't need the resources to do that, and that's not what's best for you as my patient.
All of them are saying that, apparently, because there have been people who have actually had procedures.
Right. Yes. And so now we're going into a realm where doctors are saying, okay, I will cut your leg off for you. Or in some instances, there's even been situations where the patient has kind of formulated or manipulated physicians in a way to get them to do this. Regardless, the issue at hand is, the fact is that is your leg. That left leg belongs to you, and it should not be cut off. And the loving response is to say, we need to correct the fact that you are not seeing reality, that you are not seeing truth, because that's not what's best for you. Now, that is, of course, very difficult to accept as someone who may be struggling with anything at all. For somebody to tell you that you're wrong, that's very hard to accept. But
we do it all the time, though, right? I mean, you do it if, okay, so if somebody starts to, at work, see like Nazi soldiers, right? Like some kind of like war veteran. Maybe they're not even a war veteran. I don't know. They start seeing, the devil at work. And so they start to get this idea in their head, I need to bring a gun to work, and the next time I see him, I'm going to kill him, right? And everybody, like, if they tell somebody, you're obviously, you think the logical thing is, well, I got to get this person help because something bad is going to come from this, right? Like, they could kill somebody else thinking that they're seeing, the devil or again, like a Nazi soldier or something like that. The absolute, it is not a loving response to say that is that person's reality, right? That person's reality affects other people's reality, and this is where we're at right now. This is why, like, when some people say, like, why do you even care? Why do you care about this whole transgender? It's not about you. Well, I mean, it is. Like, you talk about the whole bathroom bill and being a parent and the implications it has for your kids. Like, yes, it is. It's about all of us. And again, it's not really just about me trying to curb other people's happiness and their rights. It's about what's good for all of us, and it's about loving others enough to correct, right? This is where I think one of my favorite analogies, maybe you've heard of this, is if I see somebody drinking poison or about to drink poison, I know it's poison, I see them about to drink poison. What is the loving thing to do? What's the Christian thing to do? What's the human or the humane thing to do? To sit there and just watch as they drink the poison and say, hey, it's his right. It's okay for him to drink poison. If he is going to drink poison, like, who am I to tell him not to drink poison? What if that person doesn't know he's about to drink poison, right? You're sitting there on this, like, again, kind of moral high horse of, it's not my place to tell somebody or whatever. And that person just kills themselves, not knowing it, and you could have done something to prevent it. So it's an uncomfortable thing, but it really is the loving thing to do, to say, hey, do you know that you're about to drink poison? That person might say, like, the heck are you talking about? This ain't poison. Like, it's water. Like, no. I mean, at least let me tell you, like, before you drink that, let me explain to you why I believe it's poison, or like, I gotta at least tell you, I saw, like, this thing get mixed up. I don't want you to drink it thinking that it's not poison and then you die or whatever. At least if you decide to do it anyway, fine, that's up to you. At the very least, my job is to not stand by while other people are drinking poison, because now I have guilt in that, because my selfishness or my fear, and I think that's really what it is people are afraid. Nobody wants to say this because they don't want to be the people who are looked at as, these fear mongers and these, bigots, and you just hate people, transgender people, and you want to. No. It's not at all about that kind of stuff. It really is all about evangelism. I do recognize that these, a lot of these people are hurting and confused. I get that. And again, even saying that is offensive to people, which floors me. The fact that somebody says, I'm all the way biologically a man. I've been a man for 20 or 30 years of my life. I want to be a woman, or I feel like I am a woman. I feel like I've always been in the wrong body or something like that. The fact that it's insulting, to say that person is confused is crazy to me. But where I think, again, like, as a Christian person trying to help, I'm not there to try just insult or to call that insane, but to say, like, there is an answer to what ails you, right? There is an answer to that. Yes, there's something wrong. There's absolutely a problem there. But the good news is there's a solution. You brought that up. You talked a little bit about the theology of the body, and essentially, like, again, like, you and I have talked about this before. I am not really like an emotional person. Like, I'm not. I don't get giddy, when pastors jump around and say, Jesus loves you, hallelujah. Like, you just need to know that Jesus loves you. I'm not making fun of it. I'm just saying that that's not like my style has always been like, I appreciate a good, like, intellectually driven, I probably need more of that charismatic, heart sometimes. That is not what appeals to me. However, I feel like I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking, like, I need to be, a little bit more in that arena because logic is beginning to fail. And you do this very well. Diane does this very well. I don't often concentrate on this aspect of the theology of the body, which is a very ancient old message. It didn't come about with the theology of the body. It's always been around, which is that you were created by God with a purpose. You were intentionally created. You were not a mistake. You are not a mistake, and to think otherwise is really the tragedy, right? To think that you are somehow mistaken and to try to fix that is really the tragedy, I think, that you're dealing with. It's not that you're in the wrong body. It's that you're not allowing that truth to penetrate your heart, that you were created intentionally with a purpose, and that, God does love you with any imperfections that you have. In fact, with all the imperfections that you have, and he wants to heal you, and he wants to take your wounds and use those to heal the rest of the world. I've learned this in my own ministry, as my ministry is when I go and speak, basically it's telling my story with all my mistakes, my wounds, my pain. I open that up to people, and then I talk about how God healed me and the wonderful things he's done in my life, and how we now are enjoying all the fruits of God's work in our lives. And that's not possible without the wounds that I have too, you know what I mean? And so I guess I'm going to try to be Alicia a little for just a second here, and say, if, your struggle, I believe, is not one of logic. It's not about biology. And to anybody out there who's trying to help people who are dealing with transgenderism, it's the struggle. Don't turn it into a logical or a biological issue, because it isn't. It's an issue of the heart. It's that we're so confused at the role that sex plays in our lives, because we have been told by, for a very long time, by Hollywood, by media, movies and television, music, at school, we have been told that sex is the answer to happiness, and sex in any sort of way. And we've been experimenting with this for so long that what used to do it for us before no longer does it. We're now looking for something else, and it's come to a point where I think the experiment is ready to blow up in our faces. And I think that's, again, where it's no longer a discussion of intellectual integrity, that we're denying biology that's right in front of us. That's not the question anymore. I think the question is, okay, kind of like the prodigal son. You've gone out, you've tried it all, you've been everywhere, and none of it, worked for you. And now you're in a place where you don't know where else to go. Come home. Now is the time to come home, right? Where the Father accepts you as you are. Yeah, we'll maybe give you a little spanking, slap you in the face, give you a kiss, put a ring on your finger and a coat on your back, and feed you a feast with his best meal, because God will celebrate your coming home, and that is where you'll find your healing, right? This is the answer to the problem, in my opinion, is that people need to recognize that the search has failed them, and it's time to come home. What do you think, Alicia?
Yeah, I think that was wonderfully said. I think we're not focusing on who we really are. Well, I'm a male and I feel like a woman. Well, first and foremost, you're a person. You're created by God, and you said it perfectly.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, this is a thing that I feel very soon could start dividing our nation and fracturing, a lot of us. And so anytime that we, I guess in history, we get to that point, the message that, the prophets come back to is one of very basic, a very basic message of love. Come home. We were just, our kids, we have this little Bible that we read from every night. And tonight, the little reading was about John. He's in the desert, and this guy looks crazy. He's eating freaking little bugs, and his hair is probably full of bugs and whatnot. Doesn't shower. He looks crazy. But he comes with a very simple message, right? Which is repent. God is coming. And I remember, like, Diane was reading it to the kids, and she said, "Diane, God is coming soon. Like, what do you think that means?" And the kids are like, I don't know. I guess God's coming soon. Like, and I've always kind of, this is a thing that people might struggle with. What does it mean, God is coming soon? And repent for like the end is near. And a lot of people like to talk about that being the end of the world. I've always thought of it as just simply, like, it's time. It's time. There's in motivational speeches, you always hear, like, people say, like, hey, the second you make the decision, that's when changes start happening. You want your life to be different. You want to be successful. You want to make money. You want to get rid of your debt. The time is now. You make the decision, and this is where it starts. The time is now. The end of the struggle, the end of your former life is now, and your new life begins. So I guess that's sort of maybe the inspiration that we can leave everybody with, is simply that, if in any struggle, it doesn't matter where you've been and what you've done. If you don't know my story, you can go to thirstingfortruth.com to hear that. I firmly believe that anyone can be made new, whole, and better. And all it takes is you to say yes, to open your heart to God and make the decision. I'm going to start now. I'm giving up my old life, and I want to take on a new life. It doesn't happen magically and just like very easily. You will struggle, but as soon as you make that decision and you commit to that, I promise you, things immediately begin to start changing for you, even if that change ends up kind of evolving over a year or two, or like I'm freaking 10 years into it now and I'm still trying to get rid of old habits. But the good news is that God can make things new, and I believe that's true for everybody. Alicia, closing comments?
Again, I'm going to just put in my little feminine interjection from the lady to the ladies, from the lady to the guys. Don't forget, what we're trying to do here is not talk about a debate that's going on in Texas over a bathroom bill. What we're trying to do is what God told us to do. Our primary vocation is to love Him first and love each other. And if you have any questions for us, again, it's questions@thirstingfortruth.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are praying for you. That's it.
All right. Wonderful last words of Alicia. Alicia, thanks again for being with me. As always, it's such a pleasure. I really enjoy our conversations. So until next week, we'll see you guys. This is it for Thirsting for Truth Live.